Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and I'm back with another edition of Yarn Love, where I work with Red Heart to show off one of their beautiful yarns. This time I'm talking about Red Heart Dreamy, which comes in regular Dreamy, but also Dreamy stripes. Let's take a closer look at both of these beautiful yarns. All right, now the first thing you may notice when you look at these two labels is the yarn weight. The solid colored labels have a misprint. They should all be labeled bulky. So if you come across one of these older labels in the store on the solids, just know that even though it says 4, it should be a 5 or bulky size. So these two yarns are definitely the same weight and can be mixed and matched. They are both 100% acrylic, which means they're both machine wash and dry. Also, you'll notice that they do come in 2 different sizes. So that is the major difference besides obviously the colorways themselves. The solids come in 8.8 ounce or 466 yard balls, whereas the stripes come in 6.3 ounce or 355 yard balls. So if you are mixing them together or substituting one for the other in a pattern, you'll need to keep that in mind when you do your yarn purchasing. If we continue to turn the labels over here, let's see, this one's turned this way for me. You'll see there is a lot number for both of these, for both the stripes and the solids. So you'll want to also keep that in mind when you're purchasing your yarn. Now let's go ahead and see how it works up on the hook and needles. Okay, so here's a simple crochet, double crochet swatch that I've been working up in the Sweet Dreams colorway. Now on the label, they recommend a 6.5 millimeter hook. I find that I like to use a 7 millimeter, but I've got a little personal tight gauge, so you may want to play with your hook size yourself to see what works best for you. You can see that it definitely has some self-striping action going on here, and it is relatively easy to crochet. Now I will say there is a lot of halo here. If we look really closely at this, you can see just how fuzzy it is. And for crocheting, that can occasionally get a little, I don't want to say clogged, but it can kind of fuzz up a little bit and slow you down. You might need to straighten that out a little bit. So if you are just learning to crochet, it might not be the very best choice of yarns, but once you've got the hang of crocheting, it works pretty darn well. The other caution I would say is that because of the halo, it can be a little bit more difficult to frog. Here you can see that halo I'm talking about really well. You can see just how fuzzy that yarn is. It makes it really beautiful and soft, but it can make frogging a little more difficult. Of course, now that I'm on camera, it wants to come out perfectly, but I did find that while I was crocheting it in the project I made with it this month, it did want to snag a little bit. So if you just take your time, though, and do your frogging and just pull through carefully, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. I definitely frog a lot when I'm designing, so I ran into it a little bit more, but if you're following a pattern, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. You can see it does indeed make great stripes, even with crochet. Of course, if this were a wider project, I wouldn't necessarily have a full row of each color, but you can definitely plan out your project a little bit with those stripes. Now let's go ahead and take a look at it on the knitting needles. Okay, now this is the knit swatch I've been working up, and you can see, again, I got some really good wide stripes here. You'll also see, of course, that there's a lot more rows involved in just simple garter stitch knitting as opposed to those double crochets. I would get about the same width stripe with 2 rows of double crochet that I'm getting here with about probably a dozen rows of knitting. But I did find that despite the halo here, that knitting was very easy with this yarn. I made a full crochet project in it, but then I made up this knit swatch, and I will tell you what, I think it was a little bit easier to knit than it was to crochet. For whatever reason, I don't know if it was because I was using these metal needles as opposed to a plastic hook. Maybe that had a little bit of an effect. Maybe it's just my personal style, but I found knitting with it to be extremely easy. I think with the fuzz, for whatever reason, for the knitting, it's just a little bit easier to work with, at least for me personally. You may find that it's a little different for you. I have used several balls of this yarn now, and of course they were all the same colorway because I was making a project, but I did find that the colors were very consistent, at least within the dye lot, but again, you'll want to check that for your own projects. In terms of splitting the yarn, I didn't have any splitting at all on the hook or the needles. Frogging it, I haven't really frogged it with knit yet, but let's go ahead and do it. Let's see how it pulls out. Yep, pulls out pretty darn easily. So as long as you aren't accidentally getting caught up in that fuzz itself, I think it is pretty easy to work with, especially for knitting. I haven't found more than a couple bits where the halo had gotten a little gathered together. I guess that would be the closest thing I'd find to a lump in this yarn, but there's only been a couple little places where the fuzzes had worked their way up, and they worked right into the fabric with no problem. I also did come across just a couple knots. Like I say, I've gone through several skeins of it now, and I did come across a couple knots, but those were easy enough to cut off and continue on with the pattern. If you're using a stripe and you have a cut like that, you can always pull out that next repeat till you come back to that same section. The other thing I wanted to point out, let me pull back up the crochet swatch here, is that you'll notice my colors are going the opposite direction here. So that's something to keep in mind with this yarn too, especially if you're using the stripes. If you're using the solids, it won't matter, but if you're using the stripes, you need to make sure that if you use more than one skein, that you consistently pull from either the outside or the inside. This swatch was made with a ball pulled from the inside, and this swatch was made with a ball pulled from the outside. And because of the halo, I do actually recommend pulling from the outside. It's less likely to wear on the yarn itself, but if you prefer to pull from the inside, again, just make sure you're consistent with it if you want to keep your color order in the same direction. So the Dreamy solids come in 10 different colorways, and the Dreamy stripes come in 9 different colorways. So there's lots of fun you can have with this yarn. And I already have a free pattern for it up on mooglyblog.com, the Sleepy Blocks Blankie, which is really cute. And I've also included the stitch multiples so you can make the blanket in any size you like, not just a cute little baby blanket. So definitely try out Heart Dreamy and Dreamy stripes. Give this pattern a try if you like. I found this yarn was a little more challenging than a smooth yarn to work with, but if you are an experienced knitter or crocheter, it shouldn't cause you any problems at all. It's definitely fuzzy and squishy and lots of fun. I think it's great for both crocheters and knitters, although possibly a little easier for knitters, and maybe not for just beginning crocheters or knitters, but like I say, with a little bit of experience, it shouldn't be any problem at all. It'll make beautiful housewares as well as garments, and I think you'll really love it. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you to Red Heart for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, everybody.